So let's look at the success and failure factors from a statistical perspective. So this is from a TED talk by Bill Cross, a serial entrepreneur, investor, incubator, and so forth. I think more than 20 years, perhaps 30 years over time. The top 5 factors in success across more than 200 companies out of their portfolio, out of the companies they have invested. And basically, this outlines both the most challenging but the most meaningful thing is the timing. So it's the biggest factor of finding the right timing. There can be products and services that are way too early to the markets and they fail. They never get validation because of that. And then there can be a lot of companies that are too late to the market, so-called Me Too products, Me Too services, just copying something and not doing anything differently or not improving with whatever aspect, better customer experience, a different market, trying to repeat the same model in the same market is then if the optimal timing has passed. The team and execution really is number 2, and this is the first thing that you can have a real design impact. Timing is harder. You can play with the timing. There's strategies to take the timing into account that you can apply, but you can really change the market, I would say. The behavior of people who validate whether they are ready for your innovation or not. So team, number 2. Number 3 only is the idea. So idea is overly kind of getting too much focus in the startup world. It's much more important the other factors. The business model is also less important than the idea, because you can, if you have the right team and the right market you're after and the timing is good, you can keep changing your idea several times, so you can reshape it in many ways. But even more so, you can reshape the business model many ways. So whether you sell it as a one-time product, whether you sell it as a subscription, whether you sell it as indirect business model that it's paid by, advertising, which is not so good business model for future, but there can be many iterations on the business model itself. And finally is the funding. So the funding is the least important factor for the success. Yet if you think about your own startup ecosystem and you think about what the communication is about, so much is about funding that it doesn't make any sense in this context. It is important, yes. It is an enabler, yes. There's the right timing for it, yes. But it's totally overexposed as factors that you should be focusing on when building your company. So from the perspective of key failure factors, there's one thing over everything that is very well defined and done this research from data from more than 3,000 companies. This is a report by Startup Genome. The name has changed, that organization, so if you Google Startup Genome, you will find many things that are different than this, but you can find the original as well. I think this was done maybe 6 years ago, 7 years ago. In the material, there's a link to the actual research. So what does this premature scaling mean? It means that the balance is key. It means that if we look at the success factors, is that you don't focus only on timing, you don't focus only on team, you don't focus only on idea. But even if you think about these percentages, you should give this much percentage value for these different aspects. So here's a model that we have put together when we look at those sliders about the market and about the team. So we have put this to kind of highlight the sweet spot where how you can evaluate the balance of a startup, how you can evaluate the potential of the startup from the perspective of market opportunity, market timing, growth ambition about the team, team's commitment, scalability, and team structure. So these are the key elements from those two perspectives, the market and the organization. But it doesn't mean that the other aspects wouldn't be important as well. So really, the target in this building the company in a balanced manner is, when there's a saying to fail fast, you have to learn to fail fast. You know, in some of these like in judo and karate and these things, they learn you how to fall. So they teach you how to fall because you are going to do falling, and you have to get up fast. You have to know how to fall without too much pain. And the key is to learn from those. Learning to fail fast, to learn fast. But it doesn't mean that you should try to learn the terminal failure. So the terminal failure is when the company just dies. Someone comes and says you cannot continue anymore, whether that's a tax man, whether that's an investor, whether that's a customer, someone who has basically put the company, or because you have put the company in such a position that it's forbidden to continue. So basically that's meaning like a bankruptcy or similar. But you should really avoid terminal failure. But it could also come so that something goes so wrong that none of the team members anymore wants to work on it. It can be self-exposed, or it can, of course, also hit a market obstacle, something that wasn't prepared to, and something happened, and it basically became a terminal failure. So big part of this is also learn to assess risk, understand the risks that you're taking, take the risks, be ready to fail, but try to avoid putting company to the level of terminal failure risk. You can still do it, but at least be prepared then that may be the outcome. But for example, quite many entrepreneurs put themselves in a terminal failure path by taking money, even from a public source, a bank loan, or from an investor too early when they are uncertain that they actually can make success out of the company. Basically meaning that they haven't validated the product or service or innovation or business model. And at the same time putting fixed salaries on all the founders. Now it's pretty clear that if you can't hit those revenue numbers over a period of that time when the time bomb is ticking, or in the terms of investors, the runway, then basically you are setting yourself to the terminal failure by design on your own decision. So the other option is, of course, bootstrapping and seeing further along, but that may not be the venture you want to build. So these are all choices made. But important thing is to make them knowingly, making them together with the team members, and being prepared to accept what comes with the decision. Because then, if it happens, there is no one to blame but yourself, and you should not even feel bad about failing, because that was the risk that you decided to take. So key principles that we apply to the materials and the learnings. One of the key parts that I realized, when specifically those who haven't built companies before somehow consider that the success of a startup is a lucky thing, it's a random thing. If you put enough, like a support organizations or policymakers perspective was that if we just get enough startups, certain number of those will be successful. We don't need to know necessarily what the process is, but something comes out of these structures. But the reality is that it's a systematic process. There is certain logic that you have to do, A, B, C in certain order, or at least you have to hit certain milestones before it's logical to move to the next level. And that was the key part that we wanted to put together. Another key part was that the terminology and deeper understanding of things that are being developed. So if not knowing what innovation is, then how can you create an innovation? If you don't know what are the key factors making something an innovation versus invention, then you can't develop innovation. So only the things that are understood can be developed. So that applies to different terms, different things. So it's important to really understand what is the essence of a certain thing. There's still only limited numbers of things that need to be known, but those need to be known, basically, or otherwise it's very difficult to develop. And most importantly, if you can't measure it, then how can you know if you're improving it or actually making it worse? So you need two types of measures. One is a target. So if you don't have a target, how do you know if you hit the target or you miss the target? The other one is progress towards the target. So can you see if you're making progress towards the target? So if you don't know what the measure is, or you can't measure it, then by definition you can't improve it. So this is just pure logical thinking. And then the speed of iteration and validation cycle is the key. So all of these things matter more the faster you can execute them. The faster you can repeat things, the faster is the progress. The slower things are, the slower is the overall progress. And because in the beginning, it's all about learning and validating. So testing, measuring, validating whether that was true or untrue, doing a different iteration, testing again. This actually happens faster the smaller the team is. The bigger the team is, the more people that are involved, the slower the learning curve is, because you have to properly analyze these things and you have to then have enough people to have a conversation to make right conclusions. But if you have too many, it becomes actually harder to find the conclusions. And the process of communicating all those things through that are important things gets slower. So how principles? The key with all of this is to focus on reducing biggest universal risks. So it's not about telling 100% that just do this and everything will work. It's saying that there are still many things that you have to do, you have to validate, but there's a certain path that you most likely will have to follow through, at least certain milestones you have to follow through, and there are universal risks that keep happening over and over and over again, just because certain attention was not given to certain items, or certain items were unknown. So the most common answer I ever got for one simple question that I kept asking from all of those ones that I was mentoring, and where they had done something wrong, and then they were asking, do you have some ideas how we can fix this? Do you have some ideas how we can do this differently, or something like that? The most common answer was, when I asked, well, why did you do it that way? The most common answer was, well, we didn't thought about it. And that gave me really like it came like automatic every time, that we didn't think about it. So the reason they got into that problem was that they hadn't thought, or they didn't realize something that they could have, if they would have realized that, they themselves would have already come up with the better solution. So there is a certain value into the basics and the knowledge that can be then applied. The more you know, the more pain there is. So the knowledge adds to the pain is one saying, but at the same time, the more you know, the more you have tools to avoid things and repeating the same risks and outcomes. So really coming up with the best tools and methods specific to startups. It's a very different education to be an entrepreneur in general. It's a very different education or knowledge to run a function in a business, to be an accountant, to be, a marketing guy. Because the majority of those education don't cover anything about building an actual innovation, building an actual organization at the same time, building something out of nothing and making that financially sustainable. That's a whole different own practice, and that's what the knowledge that we cover, we focus on. So, and through this work, through the target and the milestone, it's about test and measure, no speculation. Speculation is good for ideation, it's good for coming up with potential scenarios, but really always focus on validation. Whether that's the main idea to innovation process, or whether that's a specific newsletter, whether that's a specific blog post, whether that's a specific customer message, whether that's a specific feature description, you should always test and measure. And the opinions that different people in the team have very little value. They are source of things to be tested, but there shouldn't be put pressure that someone's idea is better than someone else's, unless it's proven over and over again that one person usually gets more better ideas, but it only doesn't mean anything for the new ideas, but it's just higher probability. So what is success? So a success is of course something that everyone should define for their own company, for their own individual level, and hopefully get their own company success aligned with each of the co-founders' consideration of what success is. But there is no defined success that you have to hit exit, or you have to hit unicorn level valuation, or you have to hit. That is a self-exposed target that you want to put as your success factor. But that's not helpful if we consider more generic things. So regardless if we think success in a form of startup to becoming a scale-up, it basically means that big part of this is creating the product or service that creates new value to known set of customers. And basically, alongside, you have to build this organization. So basically, this is the more generic perspective of what happens regardless of the ambition level, unless you just want to be a small business. So a big company or a great company, a company in general, involves all these different roles and factors in a structure. You have board of directors that are looking after the strategy and not get overly confused about all the operative level things. You have operative management that is executing the strategy and managing the resources, whether that's the people, whether that's money, whether that's budget and so forth. So you have this strategy level, you have this operative level, you have external advisors and partners at both in strategy level and operative level. You have, of course, your customers, which is the whole foundation of the business. And on top of all, you have shareholders, you have investors, but also the founding team members, stakeholders, even crowd investors, if you so please. And all of these are stakeholders in the structure you are building that grow over time, and this is a common structure. I'm not saying it's the only organizational structure. You can create a better one if you can innovate it, but this is just the most commonly known these days, and the most proven and most validated one that still have issues when it comes to being agile, but even the big companies still remain agile in forms like Amazon, for example. So a great company structure, basically, if we consider what success can be, it's a self-sustaining entity that is not dependent on any single individual or organizations, including the founders. So it's not dependent on any big customer, any big financier, any individual person, where all the necessary knowledge, values, strategies, IPR, so all of the assets are permanently embedded into its structure and existence in a way that it can continue to operate, improve, iterate, build new value for all the key stakeholders, customers, shareholders, and so forth, while at the same time remaining financially stable by the value of the solutions and product it creates. So now you can understand this is like a machine that is not dependent. You can even, take bits and pieces out of it, and it still keeps going. So if you think you can, what a success really would look like at an extreme level, this would be the target. Now, even if you would think of exit, the closer you get to building a machine that is not dependent on any single item, the more valuable the company is. The more it's dependent of its people, of individual person or individual founder, the less valuable the company can be. The higher the risk of dependency.